Kia ora, everybody. Welcome to the webinar from sunny Wellington, New Zealand. As you can see, it's a very sunny day behind me here in Porneke, or Te Whanganui Aotearoa, as it's also known, Wellington, New Zealand. And yeah, thanks for joining. My name is Lauren, and I work in the Global Opportunities role here at EP Education, helping find teachers like yourselves move overseas. And this is my colleague, James.
Cheers, Lauren. Welcome everyone. Thanks for giving up your evening to join us here. I think it's a bit rude that Lauren is pointing out the lovely weather. I know it's I had a look at the weather forecast in Toronto earlier. I saw it's -11 at the moment, so that's pretty rough. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I apologise in advance if this is a bit clunky. Lauren's normal co-presenter Hamish is actually off crook today, so unfortunately you guys are stuck with me. But hopefully I don't make this too horrible for you guys, and you still want to come teach New Zealand afterwards.
And for anyone who doesn't know, crook is a very Kiwi phrase that means sick or unwell. I didn't know that for about 3 years when I lived here, and I thought I lived and worked with a bunch of criminals. But apparently, no, it just means he's off on a sick day. So welcome. I've just seen someone say it's -40 in Canada right now, so I'm so sorry. I do feel terrible. But hey, we're all here to learn a bit more about teaching over in Aotearoa, New Zealand, right? So we've got to show you the goods, I suppose. All right, I think we were just kind of waiting to see if a few more people joined, but we don't want to take up too much of your evening, so let's kick off. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. This session will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. You'll all be on mute for the duration of it, so don't stress. And feel free to ask questions rather than the chat box. It would be really great if you could pop any particular questions that you might have in the Q&A box at the top of the screen. It just makes it a bit easier when we get to the Q&A session at the end to look into, who's asked what, rather than scrolling back through the hilarious chat that I'm sure will pop off shortly. So yeah, there we go. All right.
Speaking of the chat, Lauren, should we get everyone to pop in the chat whereabouts they're actually viewing this webinar from, just so we can get a gauge of where everyone's tapping in and enjoying us from this evening?
Where are you? Tell us.
Oh, Saskatchewan, I see come through. Welcome. Always riveting to me because I can see who's typing, and it's kind of like, well, what are you going to say? It's always a mystery to me until it comes through. Ontario, awesome. Another one from Ontario. I'm not going to make that joke that everyone makes to Kiwis overseas. Oh, do you know so and so? When you just happen to bump into someone overseas, and it never happens. So I'll avoid that.
Love it. People from all over. You can probably tell, just before we get into the breaking news, you can probably tell that I'm a bit of an imposter here. I am not from New Zealand. I am from the UK, but I've lived in Aotearoa for the last nearly 10 years now. I came over just for a holiday and absolutely fell in love with the place and never left. And hopefully that might be the case for some of you. But who knows? Let's crack into it. So breaking news, James.
Yeah,
what's going on?
We say breaking news. Some of these are more recent time changes, not breaking, but have broken, but we're still worth informing the people. So towards the last part of last year, secondary teachers of all subjects, so it doesn't matter whether you're a science teacher or a French teacher or a music teacher, secondary teachers have been put on the fast track, the Immigration New Zealand fast track to residency, which is awesome. Particularly if people are looking, I know it's obviously quite a journey for people to make their way from Canada to Aotearoa, New Zealand. So to have the opportunity to potentially stay here for good and make New Zealand your home is nice to have. The NZQA pre-approved list stopped on January 1st of this year. If you're like, James, what is the NZQA pre-approved list? We'll get to that. There's a little spoiler, a little teaser for what's coming up. And the new maths curriculum was rolled out, particularly in the primary space at the start of this year. Hasn't been without hiccup for some of our schools. I know there's been a few issues with getting resources through properly and that sort of stuff, but is something, and it's really exciting that there is new curriculum being rolled out. All right.
So, team, there's probably a few reasons that you might be here. You may be feeling a bit stuck or stagnant. Maybe you don't feel especially challenged in your role, or growth opportunities are limited, or maybe you're just itching for change and travel, but you also want that job stability. Maybe it's purely for the weather. Who can say? It could be that you have FOMO, the fear of missing out. You know, I'm sure that a lot of your friends and colleagues might have made the journey over to Australia or New Zealand, and you're like, could I? Should I? Can I? We're about to tell you how. Because you're probably feeling the stress. I mean, let's be honest, we all love working in education, but it can be hard, you know, burnout, anxiety, bureaucracy, strict curriculum, fixation on exam results. I'm sure you felt at least one of these in the last wee while. Does this sound like you? If it does, some recruitment agencies might say to you that it's a breeze and then leave you in the lurch. They might not support you with compliance, or they might ask you to pay for support. But with EP Education, you will get clear on the process. We will empower you to make informed decisions and to live and work in New Zealand, and it won't cost you to work with us. We are all about placing the right educator in the right place at the right time.
I just wanted to let you suspensefully build it up.
Yeah, that was. Thanks, James. Real move there. So, a little bit about us. Do you want to take over, James?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So it says there 25 years of people-centered recruitment. It's actually a bit of a lie. I believe it's June this year. We're having celebrating our 30 years of EP education, so a little bit more than we're giving ourselves credit for there. But I think that people-centered is what it comes down to at the end of the day. And as Lauren said before, it's the right educator at the right place at the right time. We want to make sure this prospective New Zealand teaching role is the right fit for you, because if it's not the right fit for you and you don't enjoy your time over here, it's not going to be good for the kids, and they're not going to get the most out of it. You're not going to get the most out of it, and we kind of want to make sure everyone benefits as much as possible. With EP Education, there is access to exclusive roles. So often, well, we'll talk about where some vacancies are listed down later on in the webinar, but often schools and early childhood centres will come to us and say, hey, I'm looking for the teacher for this role. I haven't advertised to the job market yet. Have you got anyone that you can suggest? So always pays to, what do they say? It's not what you know, it's who you know. And so very, very important there. We manage the full recruitment process. So from woe to go, as you'll see later on, we support you every step of the way. We're not going to leave you out in the lurch halfway through, not hang you out to dry when when things are taking maybe a little bit longer than you anticipated. You'll work with experienced consultants. Some of our team have been here for close to that 25-year mark in working with us, and we have quite a few of our staff members are either former teachers, or as is the case of one of the team members in mine and Lauren's team, currently training to be a teacher. So we're not just recruitment people. We know what it's like to be in New Zealand schools and early childhood centres. We've got the experience, and we can kind of point you in the right direction of what it's actually like, not just what we think it might be like for you. We support you with interview and CV preparation. So we're going to make sure you're in the best position to succeed, and we do offer that post-placement support. So one of our lovely colleagues, Annalise, who some of you might be lucky enough to meet down the line, focuses on that post-placement support of teachers, from everything from helping you or putting you in the right directions for helping you set up a bank account, for helping you looking or giving you places to look for accommodation and that sort of thing. And I know there have been teachers that Annalisa ended up staying in touch with for many years after they've first been placed by EP, because it's all about the relationships for us and building those long-term relationships with the teachers we work with. I mean, the beautiful sunshine outside behind Lauren, if that's not selling it, maybe some of the beautiful scenery of New Zealand as well may sell it. Bottom right corner is iconic photo from Te Whanganui Aotearoa here in Wellington, where Lauren and I are both operating from. But there is beautiful scenery everywhere you go in New Zealand. I think the stat is you're 2.5 hours maximum away from a large body of water here in New Zealand, be it a lake or the beach. So you will always generally be able to get lovely coastal views. So why teach abroad? Maybe you're looking for to grow personally. Maybe you've not traveled before and want to step outside your comfort zone, but do it in a way that still has something under your control. Maybe you want to experience a new culture, or just live in another country in general. Maybe you're looking to grow your career and take that next step. As Lauren says, maybe you're feeling a little bit stagnant in what you're currently doing and you want a new challenge. Or maybe you're looking for a new life experience. I know Lauren can attest to this, from her journey, just connecting with people and making friends all over the world. And maybe you might find somewhere that you end up staying a lot longer than you thought. Again, some more beautiful scenery from around New Zealand. Now, I think it's worth just touching on the New Zealand school system just briefly. I know the New Zealand school system and the Canadian school system, different terminologies used, and it's obviously a lot more natural for us to refer to things in New Zealand terminology. So I don't want anyone attending this webinar to get confused when we say work in the ECE space or the primary space. So early childhood, ages 0 to 5, often referred to maybe in Canada as kindergarten or pre-K. Primary, often I know I see a lot of people referring it to in the North American space as elementary. So that's kind of ages 5 to 13. What we refer to in New Zealand as years 1 to 6. So we don't use the terminology of grades. We use years, and primary is actually split. And under the wider primary umbrella, you'll often see years 1 to 6 referred to as primary, and years 7 and 8 as intermediate, which are kind of the stepping stone between primary and secondary for years 9 to 13. So key things to be aware of: primary teachers in New Zealand, especially in that years 1 to 6 range, are generalists, so trained for all or curriculum subjects. Primary trained educators can work in early childhood centres, provided they've had their qualifications assessed and gotten a positive outcome from NZQA. Again, teaser alert, Lauren will talk about that a little bit later. Intermediate teachers, so those years 7 and 8, those ages 11 to 13, people will, there may be some more specialist subjects, some specialist technology and that's music, art, that sort of thing. And secondary teachers are generally subject specific. Often you might have a secondary teacher who teaches 2 specialist subjects. So I know when I was at secondary school, I had a maths teacher who also doubled as a PE teacher, or an English teacher who also doubled as a geography teacher. And so it's often handy if you've got experience teaching a couple of subjects, and schools do look for that versatility, and it may be the one thing that kind of puts you over the edge of, or gives you the edge over someone who is similarly qualified but only teaches the one subject. In terms of work options, at EP Education, we have a variety of different options available that we can kind of tailor to suit you as an educator, because at the end of the day, it's about what works best for you guys. So we call it relief teaching here in New Zealand. I know it's often referred to as supply or substitute teaching in other places. So we offer that in both Auckland and Wellington, which are probably the 2 main centres for teaching work here in New Zealand as well in general. Gives you that flexibility. You can choose where you want to work a bit more. You could work in casual day-to-day relief. You could work for you could be booked out for relief in week-long blocks or longer, and it can be a good stepping stone for you to kind of find what sort of school or early childhood centre works for you, and potentially be that stepping stone to a permanent role. Fixed term contracts, as it says there, from 1 term to 1 year generally. There's a variety of reasons why fixed term contracts are around. Could be due to maternity leave, role growth, among other reasons. Really ideal for someone who's coming over on a working holiday visa. I know, while we can't give visa advice, I know that working holiday visas can't accept permanent job opportunities. So a fixed term contract is kind of the cream of the crop there. And lastly, maybe you want to get something a bit more permanent. Maybe you're looking at relocating and relocating your family over. I know our colleague was talking about, and earlier just came in before we started this webinar, was talking about he's got a husband, a wife, and their 4 kids looking to relocate over from Canada. So maybe you're looking at something that's a bit more solid, a bit more long term. Maybe you want to look at that residency pathway that we talked about earlier for secondary. And again, we work across a range of sectors. So from early childhood to schools, special education. Often there are separate special education schools in New Zealand, and support staff, so teaching assistants in both the early childhood and the school space. And there are executive opportunities as well. We recently had I believe it was a Canadian teacher, it was not Lauren, who had experience working in the leadership space and back in Canada, wanted to ideally secure a permanent role in a leadership space. They ended up taking a 1-term teaching role to come over to New Zealand, and had since turned that into becoming the founding principal of a new school here in New Zealand as well. Often with the executive opportunities, it can be hard to get something straight off the bat, but as schools may be a bit reluctant to give that kind of leadership opportunity to someone who hasn't had experience in the New Zealand curriculum, but there are certainly opportunities and pathways to almost fast track yourself through the system and show that you can be the right fit for an executive role. So I don't think we have the poll function working. Again, I'm going to blame the fact that Hamish is off sick today. But if you would like to pop in the chat, what sector do you guys work in? I'm sure you're sick of me talking by now, so we'll give it a rest and we'll let you guys let us know what sector you work in.
Tell me where you work.
It's a bit creepy, Lauren.
It sounded like Bane, didn't it? Yeah, pop in the chat. Tell us what sector you're working in. Are you in ECE, primary, secondary? What do you teach? It would be really useful to know kind of what you do, where you are. Cool, cool, cool. Is that right, Donald? Love that for you. Primary resource teacher.
Kindergarten, so early childhood, some primary,
Lots of primary
bit more
teachers.
primary.
Cool.
Seeing secondary there as well. So it looks like we've got across the board, which is awesome to see.
Well, getting ready to teach in New Zealand. Full transparency, it's not going to be easy. We have to look at a lot of factors. We have to see, depending on the sector that you work in, if you have an in-demand subject. If you work in ECE, you're looking for an IQA ECE core components outcome. If you're thinking, Lauren, what did you just say? Don't worry, we'll go over that in a little bit. That's what we're looking for ideally with ECE teachers. And ideally relief or supply work is really in demand in the ECE space. In the primary space, we're seeing a lot of demand up in Auckland, particularly in that intermediate age group, that year 7 and 8 age bracket. In Wellington, we are seeing a lot of demand for teachers on working holiday visas for all levels. And again, that relief and supply work is very much in demand. For secondary teachers, as with every other country in the world, probably STEM subjects are really in demand at the moment, but we're also seeing a very niche demand for English and PE teachers. Schools really like it if you had experience in the Cambridge or IB curriculum. And again, relief and supply work is always in demand. In the special education space, if you have experience with high and complex needs, special education schools in New Zealand don't run in quite the same way in terms of their academic year, so they will be recruiting all year. And for all of these spaces, Catholic tagged positions are certainly in demand as well. Now, I don't want you to look at this list and say, oh my gosh, my subject isn't on there, I won't be able to move to New Zealand. It's not the case. It just means that obviously these subjects are in demand, as said. So, so these are the ones that we're seeing the biggest call for at the moment. The biggest part of looking into your journey to move to New Zealand will be navigating what are called the 4 agency processes for educator compliance.
Before we dive in, I hope everyone's poured themselves a stiff drink. It's not going to be the most thrilling of content, but it is definitely
and that's after
worthwhile.
You've had to listen to James as well. So
yeah.
Right. So these 4 agency processes are 4 separate agencies. Shocker. See, someone just left as I started this. This is how intense it's going to be. So 4 separate agencies that you're going to have to go through processes with in order to get in the classroom and teach in New Zealand. The first will be to get your qualifications assessed. The second, to gain teacher registration and a practicing certificate. Then you get your right to work in New Zealand, and then you get a salary assessment.
Now, my question is anyone paying attention to the deliberate typo on that page as well?
Yes. Number 1. Get your qualifications assessed. So I can see somebody who's mentioned in the chat about NZQA. NZQA stands for the New Zealand Qualification Authority. And yes, you will need to get as an overseas trained teacher, you will need to get your qualifications assessed in what's called an International Qualification Assessment, an IQA. There was at one stage what's called a pre-approved list with certain qualifications from specific countries being exempt from this qualification assessment. But from the 1st of January this year, that list is obsolete and no longer exists. So from the 1st of January of 2025, all teachers must now apply for a teaching IQA and get their qualifications assessed. The big thing, I think, with this part of the process is that you should try and take your time. Try not to see the whole process as a mountain. You are going to have to provide an awful lot of paperwork, things like transcripts, original copies of degree certificates. Try not to see it as a mountain. It is a lot of effort and a lot of paperwork, but do it step by step. I promise that if you go into this application with all of the things that you've been asked for, it's going to be a lot easier than having to add things to your application as you go. The teaching IQA that you will apply for in order to get registration will allow you to assess up to 3 qualifications as part of the same package, which is very useful because this can also be used for your salary assessment further down the line. So if you've got, for example, I don't know, a bachelor's of education, but you also have a bachelor's of history, you could get both of those qualifications assessed as part of the same package, and a third if you had another one. And one of the updates recently is that NZQA have asked teachers to start verifying their qualifications. Now that can be via an independent verification organisation or directly from a university. If you go on the NZQA website, you'll be able to find heaps more information about this. But your first step for everybody in this call will be to get your qualifications assessed by NZQA. The second step, once you've got the outcome from NZQA, will be to apply for teacher registration and a practicing certificate. Now, in New Zealand, it's a little different in that you apply for, as you can see, registration and a practicing certificate. Essentially, registration is for life, and that practicing certificate is valid for 3 years. So it's the part of the registration that allows you to teach in the classroom. We have a webinar which takes you through the entire process, start to finish. James mentioned before, might need a stiff drink to get through this. You will absolutely need one to watch that webinar. It's very boring, but we keep it around because it's very useful as well. So watch that webinar and see if you come away from that with questions. If you do, have a look on the Teaching Council website. They have a really great FAQ section. As with the NZQA part of the process, be prepared. Now, the joy of this part is that you're going to have a lot of the documentation already, having done the NZQA application, but there will be additional things that you're going to need. You can see on the common challenges here, you're going to need things like police checks from every country that you've been to for 12 months or more in the last 10 years. You're going to need things like potentially detailed examples of your practicum. Follow the list and try to approach this with as much information as you can. If you've taught in Australia, it might be a slightly different route for you. If you have taught in Australia previously and you still hold current Australian teacher registration, reach out and I will talk you through your process because it's going to be slightly different depending on that. You will need things like certified colour copies of your documents. And what we're seeing also is that some teachers are being asked, especially in the primary sector, are being asked to do maths or English tests. Not always, but it is something that some people can expect.
Yeah, I guess the other thing just to add on there, some people might be a little bit confused. Why do I have to have my qualifications test? And then part of that same process is getting registered as well. So NZQA solely look at your teaching qualification, and so your teacher training, whereas teacher registration is the holistic view of everything. So your practicums, your experience, the outcome from NZQA, amongst a whole lot of other things. So they are different organisations. You do need to go through both sets of processes, and it can take a little bit of time.
The third step, top tips for immigration. Well, it's a trick question because we are not licensed immigration advisors, and as such, we can't give any immigration advice. The only way to know for sure anything immigration related is to check out Immigration New Zealand's website. Please don't trust the things that you see on Google or Reddit. The only source of truth is going to be Immigration New Zealand. You might be eligible for a working holiday visa, in which case that's certainly an option that you could look into. Other options might include an AEWV, which stands for an accredited employer work visa. There are partnership visas, there are straight to residence visas. As James mentioned before, if you are a trained secondary teacher, you might be eligible for this, but of course with each visa there's different conditions. So they are all individual depending on your circumstances. You might need to do a medical examination depending on the time that you're coming for. So please factor that in if that's something that you need to do. And please also factor in visa processing times. We really encourage people not to do things like book flights until they have their visas sussed. You'd be surprised how often we speak to teachers who, are really excited and really keen to arrive, but are still waiting on a visa, and it can cause a bit of stress. So by that same logic, also only apply for that visa when you have all the paperwork. Trust me, you don't want to be chasing up Immigration New Zealand to try and find out the status of your application. The final of the 4 steps, don't worry, this is the last one, is to get a salary assessment. You would do this via education payroll, and this is something that you wouldn't do until you arrive in New Zealand. But it is something that you can kind of be prepared for before you leave Canada, in that you can get what are called statements of service. So statements of service are essentially a template that your previous schools will fill in, detailing the exact dates and hours that you've ever taught. What this means is that if you arrive in New Zealand and you have these to hand, you can apply for your salary assessment with education payroll, and you will be paid at the correct rate depending on your experience and your qualifications. If you are missing information or if you can't get these things, you won't be paid at the correct rate. In the end, you'll get back paid for it, but it pays to have everything ready before you leave home. We had a teacher who came last year, lovely UK trained teacher, was here for 6 months and doing relief work, and for whatever reason couldn't have access to these statements of service, was trying to chase up schools back home. And so he had 5 or 6 years experience, and he spent the first 5 of those 6 months being paid as a newly qualified teacher. And he did get back paid in the end, of course, but, it's money he could have been earning the whole time, and it, caused a bit of stress. So one of my biggest pieces of advice would be to really try and get onto this kind of stuff before you leave home, because it's going to be a lot easier to contact schools when you're in the same time zone, when you're in the same country, than it is when you're half a world away, because they can take a bit of time. It's also worth noting that international school experience might be assessed slightly differently depending on the curriculum that you taught and the country that you taught in, but more information can be found on the education payroll website. And that is all I'm going to put you through when it comes to the 4 agency processes. I know you're all probably asking about salary, thinking about salary. It's tricky for us to give you an exact rate because it all depends on that salary assessment that we just talked about. It depends on your qualifications, your experience. So it could be anything from sort of 59 to 99,000. early childhood teachers, sort of that 60 to 90 range, and relief teaching, so supply work in early childhood, anything from sort of 36 to 50, and in schools, 310 to 400 a day. Again, entirely dependent on your experience and your qualifications.
I will just say, make sure people are clear that is 36 to 50 New Zealand dollars an hour, and not dollars a day, and 310 to 400 a day for schools. So just note they are broken down in a slightly different way there. Often you get more flexible time length shifts in ECE as opposed to schools where they will book you for either a half day or a full day generally.
There's going to be some things, right, you need to consider before you head this way. The big ones are going to be time, money, and energy. The qualification assessment alone, so step 1, can take up to 6 months. The teaching council application, so that registration and practicing certificate, can take 6 to 12 weeks. Depending on the visa that you're applying for, 80% of visa applications are processed within 8 weeks. And then there's the interviewing and the recruitment process, which could be up to a month. So we tell people to tentatively have a 7 to 9 month window. We tell you these things not to scare you off, but we really want to be transparent and be realistic. There's no point me sitting here and telling you that you can absolutely come in 2 weeks and be in the classroom, because that's not realistic. That being said, if you were to have a job offer, we would have the option to try and fast track those applications. The Ministry of Education in New Zealand is very keen to get quality teachers in roles. So, if you have that job offer and all we're waiting for is that paperwork side of things, then we absolutely can look into fast tracking both the qualification assessment and the teaching council application as well. Money. So the qualification assessment, 746. The teaching council application, an oddly specific $564.37. Who can say why? Immigration will obviously depend on the kind of visa that you're applying for. 670, I think, is the Canadian working holiday visa. 1540 would be that AEWV, and a straight to residence visa. Obviously, a little bit more because, it's a straight to residence visa. Your flights, at the time we kind of update this as the year moves on, but right now we're looking at about 2,500 return. Again, this is all in New Zealand dollars. An Airbnb for the first week or so that you arrive, plus all of the things that you have to add up. We tell people to kind of look at a general cost of moving to be about 6,000 New Zealand dollars, or which is apparently 4,900 Canadian dollars per person. Now, remember, this is per person, and obviously it's going to be slightly different if you're moving over with a family. It's also potentially going to take a bit of energy. Interviewing, resigning, all of that emotional and psychological adjustment to moving overseas and changing your life. Networking, the cultural adjustments, family considerations, there is a lot going on. Your energy might feel a little bit depleted, but there is a $10,000 overseas relocation grant, which has been extended. This relocation grant is a reimbursement. So you would be able to apply for this reimbursement if you have a full-time role of 12 months or more, and you will apply for it within the first 3 months of teaching. This includes lots of different kinds of relocation costs, things like that teacher council application, qualification assessment, things like flights. So keep all of your receipts, and these are things that you will be able to claim back if you land a role that is 12 months or more. So it isn't going to be easy. And like I said, I'm not telling you this to scare you off. I mean, I'm here because it will be worth it. I was saying to one of my colleagues before, I'm having a real pinch me moment, which happened quite often, honestly, living here in New Zealand. The weather is amazing today. Um, just I went to the beach this morning. I was looking around just thinking, gosh, I live here. Like, and it still blows my mind nearly 10 years later. So yeah, it's not going to be easy, but there's a reason that we want to be here, right? So, are you in? Is the question.
You've been talking for a while. Do you want me to take over for a little bit
I
and give
need
the
some
voice a
water.
rest?
I won't lie, I do need a bit of water.
All right. So the academic year. So New Zealand works off their or bases their academic year off the calendar. So term one starts at the start of the year in January. The schools have just gone back in the last 3 weeks or so, through all the way to term four at the end of the year, right before Christmas. Side note: Christmas on the beach in New Zealand, you have to do it at least once. It's an amazing experience. Um, with everything that Lauren was kind of talking about with timing, this is really the opportune time for you guys to be looking at and finding out this information about what it takes to teach in New Zealand. As you saw, those processes often take months and months when you add it all up. So I know we may also have some people who are currently still studying and won't finish till midway through the year, so the end of the Canadian academic year, and that will still that will be cutting it close for a term one start next year, so 2026. But people, if you've already finished your studies, you will have plenty of time if you're looking now to come in and teach at the start of next year. I'd say that is probably, would you agree, Lauren, the most opportune time, given everything, I don't want to say hoops that people have to jump through, but the four agency processes can be quite challenging and draining, and you want to be able to spread that process out and not completely exhaust yourself doing it or stress yourself out. So
Yeah,
term
I
one
agree.
next year is a realistic start date for people.
I think a realistic start date, but also, you know, you want to alleviate the stress for yourself as much as possible. I know that obviously it, it a lot of Canadian teachers that I speak to want to have summer in Canada. Um, so, a lot of people look into doing, perhaps the end of the academic year here in Canada and then head to New Zealand later in the year, or stay in Canada, do a bit of supply teaching, and then head over, like James said, for a January start. But yeah, I think a January start is absolutely the aim.
I think it's also key to point out that there are no set resignation dates down there in New Zealand. I know some countries have set windows that you have to resign by or resign in. That's not a thing in New Zealand. So but what you do find, a lot of teachers obviously will generally try and see out an academic year before they move on to their next opportunity. So as the year goes on, kind of starting in more July, all the way through to kind of peaking November, December is when you start to see those roles advertised for the following year. So there is quite a long runway there, and that we do see positions opening up. So if you've got your paperwork well underway, and through, say, NZQA and starting to get through the teaching council by term three, that's a good time frame for things. So we've kind of bombarded you with information about the boring stuff, the compliance, the paperwork. But what do you actually need to do here and now as your next steps to coming to teach in New Zealand? Firstly, joining the webinar, great start, fantastic start. I would say that the best next first step, since the webinar isn't included on the slide, is reaching out to us, which we'll show you how to do in a moment's time, and then booking in a call with Lauren. I know I don't want to speak for you, Lauren, but I'm sure you will. That looked like you were just putting thumbs down at people.
No, I'm saying like me.
I know you very much look forward to speaking with international educators and learning about their stories and finding out what makes them tick. That's kind of the starting point. And if you can say to Lauren, look, I attended this webinar, I thought James is great to listen to. You're a bit boring, but I'll have a call with you anyway. We can, and I've looked into what documentation I need for NZQA. That's a great start. Once you've had a call with Lauren, you'll be connected with your consultant or one of your potential consultants, be it for temp work, supply work, or something a bit more longer term or permanent. The team that Lauren and myself are part of, the candidate care team, will support you with compliance alongside your work with the consultant, and the consultant will focus on more of the interview, the induction side of things. You'll be all good and clear for work, and then you'll be out in the classroom getting to educate New Zealand tamariki for our international listeners as children. So I said I'd let you know how to contact us. Your next steps are emailing careteam@epeducation.co.nz with the subject line I'm in. Attach your CV, a brief message, and it's not listed here, but I'm going to say if you can put your best joke into the email. I know Lauren absolutely loves reading them.
You know what? I reckon like some of the best jokes I've had have come from Canadian teachers. So you're a funny bunch. Please send me a joke. I go through a lot of different emails, and I don't want to say that I'll prioritize you if you're funnier, but I will prioritize you if you're funnier. So yeah, a bit about yourself, a bit of about what your plans are, if any, and yeah, chuck a little joke in for me. That would be amazing. We actually this afternoon, after this webinar, are hosting a teacher drinks event here in Wellington. Well, we have a bunch of Canadian teachers, UK trained teachers, teachers from all over the world who have ended up in Wellington and are teaching, you know, halfway, well, a bit of the way through term one. Everyone coming together for a little drink this afternoon. I think we've got about 5 Canadian teachers coming. So it's we love to host events and things like that to get everybody together when they've arrived as well. So that will be really fun. But I don't know why I mentioned that just now. I just think I've thought of jokes and how funny I'll probably be at this event later on. So you have that to look forward to if you ever come. Yeah, flick your CV through with the subject line I'm in, because it's really helpful in helping me find your email.
As I said, the polls aren't working, so I'll jump over that. But you've listened to us talk for quite a while. I apologise for that. It's something that most people would far rather not do. But it's time for your questions. So if you have any questions, we'll jump into the Q&A in the chat now. If you don't have any questions, or you're a bit time pressed, that you are allowed to leave. I'm not going to hold people hostage here. Thank you very much for joining. We hope to see you email through with a fantastic joke in your CV soon. But if you do have questions, now is the time, and please do fire away. Lauren, while I've been doing that, have you been having a look at what's in the chat?
Well, I can see that there's a question here about specifically about if it's possible to secure a 12-month full-time role. And what I will say is that it's entirely dependent on the kind of visa that you're coming on. So that's really hard for me to say. In essence, there are 12-month roles, but again, it will depend entirely on your personal situation. If you have any questions that are specific to you, feel free to flick me an email.
But in saying that, there are definitely, I know at least a couple of the teachers who are coming along to Strengths later who are in 12-month fixed-term full-time roles. So that option is certainly there. What else have we got? Someone has asked, do we have access to the slides? You will get sent a recording of this webinar afterwards, so you will be able to view all the slides again.
Someone is asking about finding your own accommodation. Teachers in general tend to find their own accommodation. We obviously are not going to just leave you completely stranded. We can point you in the right direction. If you are looking at a room to rent in Auckland or Wellington, which is the route that teachers tend to go down, you're looking at sort of $200 to $250 New Zealand dollars a week for rent. And it's worth noting that in New Zealand, generally, you get paid weekly or fortnightly rather than monthly. And it's the same with payments for rent as well. So we find that it's not quite such a lump sum that you're having to pay up front in general. Something that's worth noting, I suppose.
I see a question here. Do schools themselves have initiatives to support new teachers, especially international ones? Absolutely. So when you register and apply for your practicing certificate, you will be granted provisional teacher registration here in New Zealand. As part of that, you'll be required to go through a mentor and guidance program from your school. They will get appointed an associate teacher that will kind of be your go-to person, and they will support you over your journey through that mentor and guidance program, which is for 2 full years. Obviously, if you were in a 1-year fixed term role and then moved to a different school, you get a second, or you obviously have a new person at your new school. But once you've gone through that kind of 2-year mentor and guidance program, that would be when you could look to apply for full registration here in New Zealand. There isn't a difference between provisional and full registration, nothing like that. It purely means that the provisionally registered teachers, as I get tongue-tied, will be given that mentor and guidance support, and they will factor in as well that you are not just new to teaching in New Zealand, but new to the country as well. And we know that we've had some school communities who have, I remember my colleague Annalise telling me recently about a teacher who brought their whole family over. I think it was actually from South Africa. The school was based a couple of hours away from us here in Wellington. The school drove down to Wellington Airport, met the family at the airport, picked them up, drove them back to their school provided accommodation because of where they were, and the school community had actually kind of done a whip around, collected some money, and bought them groceries for a certain period of time while they settled in. So there is certainly a lot of wraparound support for our international teachers from their new school communities.
Absolutely. A couple of questions here about relief teaching. Would you require a vehicle? Now, obviously, like we said, relief teaching is in Auckland and Wellington. When you are relief teaching with us, you have access to an app in which you select the days, the dates, the hours that you're available for work, but you can also set the parameters of how far you are willing to travel. So you are completely in control of how far you travel. If you want to get a car, get a car. If you want to get a bus, get a bus. It's entirely up to you.
in both Auckland and Wellington, there are good public transport systems, so you can survive without having a car if that's not something you are looking at investing in. Say you're only here for several months, you don't want to have that added expense of buying a car. You will be able to survive on public transport systems,
especially in Wellington, I would say. Wellington is also a very walkable city. If you're in the city centre, we've had quite a few teachers who just got bicycles as well, cycled around. It's a very cyclist friendly city as well. So yeah, it entirely depends on where you're based and how far you'd like to travel, and how long you're here for as well. Like James said, completely understand you not wanting to fork out for a car if you're only here for 6 months. But yeah, there are certainly options either way. Awesome.
I think that's all the questions coming through now. So I'll stall for 30 seconds or more longer, but again, thank you everyone for taking an hour out of your day to listen to Lauren and myself ramble on. Hopefully we've given you a better understanding of what it's going to take for you to be able to teach New Zealand. Hopefully you're still keen, but if you're not and you've decided that New Zealand isn't right for you, or that the processes are going to be more than you want to go through, that's okay too. We're glad that we've at least been able to make sure you haven't wasted or felt like you've wasted your time by going partway through the process and realizing it's actually harder than it looks. We, as Lauren said before, we want to be as upfront and honest as possible.
The webinar will be available after the fact, so you will get sent a recorded version of this webinar to look back through. If you send an I'm in email, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to start the process right away. Just means that you're showing your interest. So feel free to get in touch. Love to hear from you.
That is email careteam@epeducation.co.nz with the subject line I'm in. Attach a brief message about yourself, your CV, and your best joke. And the best joke will win a special place in Lauren's heart.
Truly. Good luck.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Kia kite.